Okay. All right, so just two presenters before we.
I can. I have no problem doing it.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Thank you for. We never know what's. We are convening our St. Paul City Council policy committee. This is actually a gun panel discussion. I don't know which committee structure it falls into, but mostly what we're hoping for today is a conversation. So I'm going to let Holly, who has really been orchestrating this, just briefly kick us off. I have a few comments and housekeeping items before we get started, and then we'll dive into our content. So thanks, folks, for being here today. Ms. Houston.
Good morning, council members and guests. I'm Holly Houston, the council's chief budget officer. In addition to working with the budget, I also work closely with the council on their policy sessions throughout the year, and that really helps identify future budget priorities. And I just wanted to say thank you to all our guests for working with me and being collaborative as we plan this session. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for being here today. So.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you, Holly, for organizing this conversation. So 1 year into our pandemic, we know that COVID has been a challenge for everybody, from unemployment and employment, from childcare challenges to housing, people being out of school for far too long. I'm saying that as a mother of 3 teenagers. We know community members are truly struggling. And we also know that city services have been reduced. We know that our partners have faced challenges in providing services. And we know that across our nation, for all of these reasons and more, that we've seen an increase in violent crimes and gun violence. And the reaction side to those, gun violence and the increase in crime with our police and our prosecutors and our jails and our courts, they have also faced their own challenges. And so as a council, we have prioritized reducing gun violence and crimes is really the top of our list of priorities this year. And it has always been a priority, but this year we are focusing all of our efforts on really identifying where the holes are in the plan that we are employing in our city, looking to other cities across the country for best practices, and trying to identify how we, with our limited authority, our true authority lies within our city's budget and where we are able to push to have funding and resources allocated. And we're really interested in getting behind a plan that is coordinated and can show us that we are having success. And so in the course of this year up to today and going forward, we are talking to experts, our community partners and experts, to learn what's working, what's not working, what are the sources of the challenges we're facing, how can we be better partners. And the intent of this conversation today is really a first part of a panel discussion that we would like to continue having as we move into our budget season, and really hoping to walk into that with our eyes wide open. The intention would be to have a plan that we are funding. Usually it's more piecemeal. Each department, each partner, each resource wants some money. And what we're really looking for is how does it all add up, and how can we put our resources behind a plan, again, that we can measure. So thank you for being here for our first panel. We have had some presentations at our city council meeting as well, and hoping that these things as we continue forth will add up to maybe a epiphany, a catharsis, or just at the very least just a plan that we can all get behind and work together as partners, because we know it's going to take all hands on deck from intervention, prevention, all the way on down the line. So thank you for being here. The last thing I will do before I turn things over to our panelists is a little bit of housekeeping. I just want to remind my colleagues, if they have headsets, that they're easiest to hear from and easiest for our closed captioning to transcribe. And I know that it's not always possible with various levels of Wi-Fi, but if you can keep your cameras on during the presentation, it helps as a panelist when you're presenting to faces, not pictures. And also, I'm going to try to facilitate this conversation by not only using our hands up feature, which helps because it keeps people in a queue in order of what hands went up, but also by watching your faces and making sure that we have more of a conversation than just a hands up panel. But there's also only 90 minutes, and so with 7 council members and 5 panelists, we'll have to be succinct and manage that, and we'll do it together. So to the extent people can have their cameras on, that helps me facilitate. So with that, I am going to start out just by giving our guest panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves, to talk about a little bit about the work that they do and how their work ties into our just really the focus of the work, the results you're seeing, and just a brief overview of what are your challenges, and then we'll dig into some questions. Mr. Franklin from the Community Ambassadors was voluntold to go first, and I appreciate his willingness to do that. And then we will hear from our other partners. I believe Mayor Brock is here from Moms Demand Action. We have Pastor Gibbons from our Healing Streets program. I know he's got a new job title, and I did not jot it down, but upwards. And we'll hear from him, and then we will hear from our police department. Our Deputy Chief Benner is here in the house, and then Erica Schumacher from the County Attorney's Office. So let's start with Mr. Franklin. Welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Joel Franklin. I'm the director of the Community Ambassadors Initiative. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Southside Chicago. Actually came to Minnesota about 30 years ago to go to law school. My first legal job, I was actually in St. Paul, assistant St. Paul city attorney. I practiced as a public defender in my life. So as an attorney, I've been a prosecutor, putting people in jail, and I've been a defense attorney, keeping them out of jail. I got a little burnt out because the ones I put in jail looked like me, and the ones I kept out of jail looked like me. So currently I'm working with youth, trying to keep them out of the criminal justice system. So just to talk a little bit about the Community Ambassadors Initiative, we started about 8 years ago due to complaints downtown St. Paul from residents and business owners about out-of-control youth. The business owners went to the mayor, who was Chris Coleman at the time, demanding more police presence downtown. And Mayor Coleman actually called in the police chief at the time, Tom Smith, and basically Tom said, well, we can't arrest our way out of this problem. So Tom actually contacted a good friend of his, Billy Collins, who had been the CEO, president of the YWCA in St. Paul. They'd done a lot of collaboratives over the years. Billy had 40 years experience in youth work. So Billy said, we should bring back the old concept of community outreach worker. So they hired 12 youth workers. These are experienced youth workers, individuals that work in the schools, the rec centers, juvenile corrections, and other nonprofits working with youth. And just based on that pilot program over the summer, downtown St. Paul, they were able to reduce juvenile crime by 40% over the summer and juvenile arrests by 40%. Based on that success, we expanded citywide. So the community ambassadors, we have teams in all the police districts. We have a team in the Eastern District, Central District, and Western District. And then a few years later, Chief Harrington, when he was the police chief of the Metro Transit Police, he actually contracted us to deal with the increased ridership after Johnson High School went away from school buses, and had the young people use the MTC buses. When we went citywide, we actually had a 63% reduction in juvenile arrests, and we've been maintaining that ever since. What the ambassadors do, we basically have youth workers in the community, on the streets, in the hot spots. We collaborate with the police to determine where they should be. They engage with young people. We de-escalate fights. We talk to the young people to see what resources they need. We refer them to resources such as housing, or if they need food, if they have issues with mental health or substance abuse. We also help them with jobs. We do have a partnership with the city's Right Track program to employ young people. Mayor Coleman, when we first started, felt that the best way to keep young people out of the criminal justice system is to employ them. So we have a partnership with the Right Track program, and we also help young people find other jobs. At the end of 2019 and beginning of 2020, when there was an uptick in gun violence, we were approached by Mayor Carter as well as the City Council to have discussions about what can be done to address some of the gun violence. So we actually were written into the Community First Public Safety Initiative, and we will receive some additional funds to help with the gun violence. As a result of that money, we were able to increase our teams. After talking to the City Council, several of the members said, well, we can use additional ambassadors in our district. So with the additional funds from the Community First Public Safety Funds, we were able to create a North End team, a Sunray team, a Midway team, and a Frogtown team. So in spite of the fact that 2020 was crazy with the pandemic, I had to pull the ambassadors off the streets for several months. We ended up with a pretty good year. On average, we would have 3,500 contacts with young people. At the end of last year, with the additional ambassadors, we grew from 36 ambassadors to 50. And we grew from having 4 ambassador teams to having 8. So based on the increased number of ambassadors, we were able to increase our number of contacts from an average of 3,500 a year to over 14,000 last year. We were able to take 3 guns off the streets. We literally walked up on a few disputes with young people where a young person was pointing a gun at the chest of another young person, and based on the relationship that the ambassadors had, they were able to convince the young person to put the gun down and leave the scene. That actually happened on several occasions. Another occasion, one of my new leaders from the new teams, he was just driving his car, saw a group of young kids, about 10 to 12 years old, engaged in a fight. He got out of his car to break it up. When the kids were running, one of the kids dropped a gun. So he was able to pick that gun up, and we turned it over to the police. So I think we had some huge impact last year. With the pandemic, we wanted to do a lot more than we were able to. Hopefully, with things turning around this year, we can do more direct services. I'm sorry, the last thing I think I was supposed to talk about some of the challenges. Some of the challenges we have with our initiative are we deal with the high-risk survival-based youth. So it's harder for us to build relationships with them, and it's even harder for us to transfer that relationship to other resources. So we actually are seeking other resources where the young people will stick. But what I would like to do is actually develop our direct services. We have some of the best youth workers in the state, if not the country, and I would like to utilize their talents. So we'd like to do more direct services ourselves where we maintain the kids that we relate with. We're looking at starting a leadership academy, doing life skills and work readiness training. So that's what we have in store for 2021 in the future. The other challenge I would just say, it is frustrating work doing youth work as a whole, because you really don't know if you have an impact on a young person right away. Sometimes it takes years before you know you had an impact. So it's sort of frustrating that way, but it feels good when a young person comes to you and said you really had an impact. I had a lot of my staff tell me stories about 5-10 years later, individuals said you had a huge impact on my life. So that's one of the challenges, that a lot of times we don't know what kind of results we have for years. I'll stop there. Thank you.
No, it is so true. I know that there are some interactions I had with teachers in junior high that literally transformed my path forward. Mm-hmm. And only 20 years later was I able to say, hey, what you said to me in the hall made a huge difference. It's amazing what that one touch or a couple touches like that can really add up to. And I also just want to say before we move on to our next introduction that you really see with the increase in ambassadors what that means to increase in contacts. I mean, the numbers have just really rocketed up. I mean, to think about 3,000 You're saying a week? Or,
3,000 a year, 3,500 a year to 14,000. Yeah.
To 14,000 is just huge, and it's not, it's not because they're the same group of people is running around 5 times faster. It's because we've really increased the amount of folks out there making those contacts. And the other thing is, you never know what person's contact is going to make a difference. Some people connect with some people, and some people don't. So having those additional people, personalities, and styles out there is great too. So I really appreciate hearing that increase in numbers, especially in our really challenging year. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We are going to get introductions from Merritt Brock from Moms Demand Action.
Great, thank you. Thanks to those of you on the council who have been big supporters of Moms Demand Action in the past. And for the rest of the group, my name is Merritt Brock, and I'm a volunteer with the Minnesota chapter of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. I live here in St. Paul with my husband and kids, and I'm also a gun violence survivor. My brother died by suicide with a gun, which is one of the big motivators for me to get active in this work and stay active. So thank you for giving me a chance to talk about what we do. Moms Demand Action is a nationwide organization. We're a nonpartisan grassroots movement, really of volunteers fighting for public safety measures that are designed to prevent and ideally end gun violence. We work on things like passing stronger gun laws and then working within our communities and with business leaders to change our culture around guns and really encourage responsible gun ownership. And, I think our perspective is based on this optimistic belief that gun violence is preventable and that working together as a community, we can keep our families safe. So we have volunteer chapters in every state of the country. But here in Minnesota, we're particularly active. We have what we refer to as local groups all over the state, including quite a large active group in St. Paul. And we have thousands of volunteers who are moms, dads, uncles, aunts, gun owners, gun violence survivors, really working together to end what we refer to as a public health crisis. So thinking about the question of, why are we seeing this increase in gun violence? I'm sure it's no secret that, first of all, we had some problems keeping guns out of the hands of dangerous people to begin with. Then you add in just the lack of social supports that were created by COVID, add in divisive politics and the economic security that we're going through right now, and then that sense of the government and the people in power aren't really available to protect us as citizens. And, we've seen just exponential increases in gun ownership and permits to carry across the country. And all of that together, it's no surprise that gun violence is increasing in St. Paul. Again, we really feel like that some optimism that we've been able to change the culture around guns and have constructive conversations. We're not in that place of, sort of the NRA gun lobby, guns everywhere all the time. We're talking about what does it mean to be a responsible gun owner. But that is also kind of the challenge right now. We've got all of these people without the positive supports of the past and with all the concerning issues right now. And so how do we have those discussions and how do we promote responsible gun ownership? There are several things that Moms Demand Action works on, and we sort of work, at the legislative level, whether it's state or federal government, on common sense gun laws, and then at the person-to-person level, where we are having meetings in church basements and community centers and people's homes to help parents know how to keep their kids safe around guns, or engage people in preventing gun violence in their communities. We are also just tremendously enthusiastic supporters of programs like the Ambassadors and Healing Streets and gun violence interruption programs. And in other parts of the country, we've really seen the positive impact. We've seen how those programs are a vital component of public safety. We want to make sure they're fully supported, whether it's through the city budget, making sure they have the resources they need, but also from the community perspective. And we've done things like inviting leaders to speak to our membership meetings so everybody understands what programs are out there and available, or partnering for fundraisers or supply drives, that kind of thing. We're also really concerned about enforcing existing laws consistently and efficiently, and the two that come to mind are Minnesota's negligent storage law. I think we know that too many people own guns but don't store them safely, and that can have tragic consequences. We had a 2-year-old boy just in December who found a gun in his bathroom and shot and killed himself. That's one consequence of people not storing guns safely. Other instances like guns being stolen out of cars or as part of other crimes just adds to the problem. So we support that through our Be Smart program, which is an education program. And Councilmember Naker is hosting a Be Smart session in April to kind of understand what that program is and how the city might be able to use those resources to spread the word. The other is the domestic violence surrender order, and making sure that if someone has a domestic violence order protection, I think I've got that term right, against them, that they are also surrendering their guns and not able to buy more. And again, thanks to Councilmember Naker for helping us understand how that's being applied here in St. Paul. And then, I think generally we're concerned that there's some apathy about gun violence. So I so appreciate what you're doing here today. I think it will be really critical for the cities to step forward and publicly and with a sense of urgency commit to turning around this gun violence crisis that we have in our city and beyond. And of course, I have a few ideas of what that might look like, but maybe I'll let some other people talk for a minute. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We are going to move it over to Pastor Gibbons. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, City Council. It's an honor and pleasure to be here and glad to be in front of you all to give an update about the work. My name is Danny Gibbons. I am currently in 2 roles within the county, and I apologize if there hasn't been clarity about what the transition has been. A lot of work has moved fast, but I am still the active director of Healing Streets Project and will continue to move forward with that work. I am not abandoning the work. I am still present in the work and will continue to move forward with that work alongside my new appointment as the TST director. And we can talk a little more about that later, of how that work merges and connects together. But from the Healing Streets standpoint, to give a brief overview of the work, I was hired in February of 2019 by Ramsey County Public Health to begin to research and look at the different models and approaches to address gun violence prevention, intervention work, and awareness around it. And so I studied models both nationally and internationally, came across a number of models that were greatly resourced and had amazing data to support them. Among those models, of course, Cure Violence, which is another iteration of the GVI work. Have definitely studied the GVI work and have been working very closely with Sasha Cotton in the Office of Violence Prevention in Minneapolis. Looked at the model of work from the Credible Messengers that's taken place on the East Coast with the Bronx Community Connections for Youth, doing work with them. And then lastly, looked at a lot of work that's happening in the West Coast, and specifically talking about Youth Alive, the work that's happening there, talking about the work that's being led out of Oakland Office of Neighborhood Safety, and specifically the Advanced Peace model that was started in Richmond, California under the leadership of Devone Bogle. So spent the first almost about 9 to 10 months in research mode, just trying to develop a model. I appreciate both Merritt and Joe's personal testimony and sharing their connection to it. I am a survivor of both sides of the gun, and so my lived experience informs the work and the approach. The idea and conceptualization around the Healing Streets motto is it's a three-pronged approach to ending and/or reducing cyclical retaliatory violence. The model itself, it's a community-centered model, healing-based approach to addressing this work. In November of 2019, unfortunately, there was a shooting in the Midway area of St. Paul, close to the new soccer stadium. I was contacted by Mayor Carter asking, what would an investment look like into Healing Streets to begin to address this work. So I was invited to be, Healing Streets was invited to be a part of the Community Safety First initiative to address the challenges around public safety and specifically gun violence within our community in partnership with community ambassadors and other SPPD, Returning Home Citizens, Parks and Rec. So there's a nice little collective of us that are doing that work. Among the challenges that were experienced once we got to the place of being identified as a recipient of the funds was a transference of the funds. So we received the funds in July of 2020. We're able to execute a contract with Restoration Inc., who began the first prong of the work. We begin to lead the work from the healing standpoint and doing the grief responsive work. Was our intentionality around that, with knowing that we would be building up to being able to have community mediators on the streets, community health responders on the streets. We just wanted to move into that first iteration of the work. Executed the contract in July, had folks out on the street in August. That's why when I say folks, I'm talking about our grief workers were out on the streets. The work that they specifically were tasked to do was to work in responsive coordination with all of the partners that are the Community Safety First initiative recipients, but specifically we have been working with St. Paul Police Department and having a coordinated effort to address the concerns of residents who have been impacted by group or gun violence and or survivors of such that needed grief-related and grief-supportive services. What those services look like are in-person, one-to-one grief services, and that could be a circle with any iteration of an individual or their family. It's a customized way of doing the work, so we're coming to them and not necessarily expecting them to come out to us. Alongside of that work, we have a community grief circle that we host 2 times a week in St. Paul that is accessible to St. Paul residents, and all are invited to, not just St. Paul, Ramsey County residents, all are invited to come and participate. So we've been doing that work on the ground since, again, August of 2020. We were afforded an opportunity to come up here before City Council. I want to say it was possibly November of 2020, where my violence prevention coordinator, Mark Campbell, came and presented where we are. There was some concerns about the dollars that were spent, and among the challenges there were being good stewards of the funds, running and navigating procurement barriers that existed within our own county system to be able to get these funds out in an exponential way. And after that meeting with City Council, we were able to move into a place of doing the work much more expeditiously, if you will. So I do have data to present later that I think will be very helpful. I will share with you that since our meeting with you all in November of 2020, we just yesterday got the final clearance on the final community mediator, which is basically going to be our credible messengers, to put our intervention, our violence interrupter folks on the ground to begin doing this work. So we hired them. They have an official start date of March 29th of this month, of this year. We leave to have them trained in the Advanced Peace model in April, the first week of April, and then plan to come back and hit the streets in the latter part of the spring, early summer, begin doing this work. We have 4 formally justice involved and or community credible persons who have experience with group of gun violence, as well as the connection to the different groups that have been named to be responsible for large portions of the violence that we see happening. And I'll say to you that we have a great team of folks. We have a brother who has been doing some amazing work in East St. Paul. As many of you may know, there's an East Side, Selby side beef that happens, as well as some of the iterations of the Rice and Winnipeg beef that's happening. So I was blessed to be able to hire 4 individuals from the respective areas. So East Side, Rice and Winnipeg, Selby side, and we have someone who has deep connections to West St. Paul and some of the challenges we're experiencing with group of gun violence. This is where we are today with the work. I'm happy that we're about to get trained and moving forward. Lastly, I'll state this. Our funding is comprised of $300,000 that comes from the city of St. Paul. We have $340,000 that was committed from the public health standpoint, ongoing. There is $100,000 that we received from UCARE. There's $35,000 from the St. Paul Foundation and $10,000 from the Bigelow Foundation, which puts us upwards of close to about $750,000 to begin doing this work. So just a brief overview. I'm definitely happy to answer questions later on. Hopefully this was helpful, and thank you all so much.
Thank you so much for that. And I will say that I'm really glad to hear about the partnership with Advanced Peace. I think that getting connected into a larger movement and group where the training is available and we're not inventing everything, like reinventing the wheel here in St. Paul, but instead being part of a bigger movement and being part of proven methods that we know work. I know Advanced Peace is very credible and has a lot of support behind it. So I'm glad to hear that update. I think that takes the pressure off us in St. Paul to, like as I said, try to invent a brand new program here when there's great programs that exist. So that's great to see our work connecting to that. I appreciate that information.
And thank you, Madam Chair. If I can quickly add, I did mention that in November of 2019, 2020, myself and Sasha Cotton went out west to meet with Advanced Peace in LA County, Oakland. We did a tour of San Francisco and all of that, the work that they're doing out there. So it's a collective effort. It's not an effort that sits solely within Ramsey County. It's about this collective partnership and creating an ecosystem around the work.
That's great. And especially, recognizing that we care more about the boundaries between Minneapolis and St. Paul and Hennepin and Ramsey County than anybody who lives in the community. No one stops at the border and says, no, I'm in Minneapolis now. Now I'm leaving Minneapolis, I have to stop. So I think that knowing that it's a collaborative also with Minneapolis is great. What happens in Minneapolis is happening in St. Paul and vice versa, so that's good news. Wonderful. Well, thank you for that update. I know we're going to have likely more questions for you in a moment, but let us shift our focus to Deputy Chief Benner and give him the spotlight for introductions.
Well, good morning. Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don Benner. I'm the Deputy Chief of the Major Crimes Division. I've been so since October of 2019. I'm born and raised in the city of St. Paul. Grew up in the Summit University area. After high school, went and did some time in the military, and after that, second generation law enforcement. My dad's retired from the city of St. Paul as well. Like I said, a 30-year career here with the St. Paul Police Department. I've done I always joke and say I've done everything on the job except ride a horse or ride a motorcycle, but everything else in between I've pretty much touched it, from working in the schools with DARE, narcotics work and undercover work to patrol work, so a gamut of things. But with that, major crimes is what I have right now. What we're focused on as we look at gun violence, it's just the Major Crimes Division is the investigative portion of the police department. So after the crime happens, the patrol officers through operations handle the call. It comes to the investigators, and we follow up from there. But underneath that umbrella also is the gang gun unit, which also deals strictly with the violent crimes. So I have the gang gun unit and also the homicide unit as it relates here as we start talking about violent crime here and the gun violence in the city of St. Paul. So got some other talking points that we can go on later on, but that's just an introduction of who I am and where we're going from there, unless you want something more from me at this time.
No, I think that's helpful. We did have Assistant Chief Thomaser in a few weeks ago to share some information with us at the council as well. If you want to talk a little bit about just maybe results you're seeing or any of your challenges before we move on to the county attorney's office, that might be helpful, unless that's stealing your thunder for a later part of what you want to share.
Nope, just not really sure where you wanted to go with here. It's just specifics. Are you talking about the challenges? I mean, we have the challenges like anything. It's just like I appreciate hearing Joel speak and Pastor Givens speak. We're hand in hand with them because of the challenges that we have out on the street. As we talk about gun violence, from what I see and through my experience, it's the availability of the weapons that are out there. It was nice hearing from Merritt Brock about, the illegal gun storage. That was a big thing that we saw also as it relates to the concealed carry and a lot of firearms that are being left in motor vehicles. So there's a lot of guns being taken there, so the availability that way. Also with burglaries of homes and weapons that are being recovered from there. Years ago, we would have gun store burglaries where the individuals were driving cars to the front end of a gun store and taking a bunch of firearms that way. But they changed the law and they talked about storage and how gun shops would have to store their weapons, and that helped slow it down. But what I see now, it's the homeowners having the weapons and not securing them properly at home, and it gets into the hands. So there's a lot of the firearms that we recover out here on the street that had been reported stolen, and they just get it in the wrong hands at that time. But I don't know where. That's where I am right now.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Is there any requirement if your gun is stolen that you have to report it as part of being a licensed permitted gun owner?
No, not that I'm aware of.
All right. And is there any rules around storage of guns in cars? Secured storage, or is it just fine as long as you have a permit to carry, just fine to stuff it under the seat or in your glove compartment or whatever? No rules?
Right, not that I'm aware of. We start talking about the Negligent Storage Act. As long as it's not accessible to a child or somewhere like that, if it's in your motor vehicle, I'm not aware of any law that prohibits you of as long as it's out of sight. But yeah, no.
Yeah. Well, and we read the police report summaries every morning, and the number of guns that are located in cars by ineligible folks is stunning. It's really, I hate to say this, but to me it's surprising. Sometimes there's not more folks shot, just given the number of guns out there. And we've heard officers say that they used to show up to a shots fired call and find a victim and a suspect, or look for a suspect and there'd be a victim. And now it's hard to tell who is the victim, who is the shooter. There'll be several different casings, and that people are shooting at each other as opposed to one person is shooting at one person, which really demonstrates the proliferation of guns in the hands of folks that probably shouldn't be handling guns. And even just stories of shooting out of windows of cars as they're driving by, and just the disregard for the impact of that on the community is pretty shocking. So I'm sure that's frustrating, but we do, always concerned about the safety of our officers out there, given the number of guns that you're encountering all the time. So I want to lift that up and point it out. I know it is a real challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's get one more intro. We have Erica Schumacher from the County Attorney's Office that we will shift the focus to now. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you so much, Council President and members. I'm Erica Schumacher from the Ramsey County Attorney's Office. I'm happy to be joining you for this conversation today. I do want to say out of the gate, I'm not sure how we got to be experts in this. We are certainly happy to be part of the conversation and certainly care a great deal about gun violence. But I think some of the real experts you have on this panel, in terms of the folks who are seeing us day in and day out, who, like Danny, have lived experience in our community, and are coming to this issue, in a very thoughtful, very genuine way. So I just want to acknowledge that out of the gate. So I work in the county attorney's office. I focus on our strategic initiatives. So systems change, legislative change, policy change, thinking about the issues in our community as they relate to public safety and wellness. And are we getting the outcomes that we seek to get for our community? Are we abiding by our community's values? And if not, what do we need to change? And so really trying to think strategically about how we partner with all of you, different levels of government, the city and the county, the justice system, our schools, to have the type of community that we all expect and deserve. So I want to say that we have worked so for, first of all of the youth that are involved in any type of a delinquency issue are referred to us in Ramsey County, countywide. So that's our jurisdiction is anything involving a youth, which would be under age 18 and starting at age 10. So if it's a child younger than that, it's in the child welfare system. But children starting at age 10 may be referred to us. We don't get very many of them, thank goodness. But age 10 to 17 is the youth aspect of our job, and then anything 18 and over would be considered adults. And we have seen increases as law enforcement have in shots fired and people being shot with weapons. We've then seen increases in the cases that we get referred to us from law enforcement. So both on the youth side and on the adult side. And this will not surprise any of the folks on this call, but the significant challenges with respect to the pandemic. There have been a lot of folks who are experts in this field talking about how the pandemic has disproportionately impacted the same communities that were stressed before. It has laid bare the health inequities that are experienced by those same communities. Community members have, not only lost loved ones to the pandemic, they've lost caregivers for kids. We have kids that are increasingly detached from school. We have challenges with with folks with respect to jobs and the service sector and living multiple folks in a household. All of those stressors are piling on to some of the same folks in our community. And so it shouldn't surprise us that the violence has increased as a result. People can only take so much, and people who have resources have been able to weather the storm a little bit better because they have access to resources, and folks who have limited access have just had things pile onto them. So I just think it's important for us to acknowledge that. It's also important from a racial equity perspective to acknowledge who those folks are in our community. It's primarily people of color. In our office, it's primarily folks from African American and disproportionately Native American communities that we're seeing referred to our office. And so to me, it's not only a moral obligation that we come together and invest in our community and get things right, acknowledge the historical and present trauma that people are suffering, but it's just imperative that we come together to do this. And we do have good work happening, I think, in silos and in buckets. You guys have invested in some of that work, and Danny was just talking about some of the work that's going on the ground. Joel was referencing it as well. The community ambassadors have been working for a long time. They're trusted people in our community, but they're not available 24/7. They're not able to provide everything that people need on the ground, and they're spread too thin. And so I'm glad that you've invited us here for this conversation today. Some of the challenges we face, we are downstream. So we are largely in a reactive mode. And so a few years ago, when some of the numbers started to spike, we were working with some of our national partners in New York at John Jay College, and David Kennedy, who leads the National Network for Safe Communities, said, would you guys ever be interested in getting some type of group violence intervention effort off the ground in St. Paul? And we said, absolutely, tell us more. And so it was Deputy Chief Paul Iovino at the time, and I and one of our attorneys in our office went out to learn all about GVI and how it works. And subsequently, I won't rename them, but Pastor Givens mentioned several different other strategies that cities have across the country. We've spent time learning about them. We are definitely interested in some type of focused deterrence model, building off the efforts that Danny has going on with Healing Street, but really thinking about how do we also align our office and law enforcement. Part of one of the most compelling things we heard at a conference was a police chief, and I think he was from Ohio, and his second in command, and they were talking about implementing GVI there, and the second in command said, I was adamantly opposed to this. I told the chief, no way, no how are we doing this? This is a waste of time. It's frou-frou, we're not doing it. And the chief said, no, I really think we should take a look at it. And he said, we went back and forth, and finally the chief said, no, we're doing it. So figure it out, we're gonna do this. And he said, now, I think this is how every police department in America should operate. He said, you know, we used to come in on a scene and arrest everything that moved and sort it all out later. He said, now we're much smarter about what we do and much more targeted. And we have been able to decrease arrests significantly, which has helped us to build trust with our community. And so I think this is a big issue. There are a lot of different aspects that need to be covered by a comprehensive strategy. But we just want everybody to know that we're very interested in being part of the solution. We're at the table, wanting to partner and really wanting to. I'm glad you raised the issue of resources and investing, because it is going to take a significant investment and a coordinated approach to really do this well for our community. And I also want to say we recognize that we're not trying to import another model in. You know, Pastor Givens talked about learning a lot about Minneapolis. We've learned a lot from them about what they've tried. You know, we have to do this the St. Paul way, and we have a lot of folks working on the ground in our community on their own time and their own money, trying to support our community. And to me, we really need to invest in them and get an infrastructure of support and proactive engagement with the folks that are most caught up in the violence to really start to address this challenge in our community. So thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Schumacher. And just a reminder to my colleagues, we did hear a report from Cure Violence, probably about 2 years ago now, that Luisa of Alvarez, I can't remember her last name.
She's a GVI coordinator, yep.
Yeah, came and presented information about the program to the council. So just a little bit of perspective on that. And I think just to your point also, and I believe I said this in the beginning of our conversation today, but just looking at the opportunities with the American Rescue Act funds that are coming in to the cities, I think there's an opportunity to really frame up a plan and fund it. When we're funding little bits of programs around the edges and talking about reform, we're not really talking about reform. We're testing out some models, and if we want to make a real switch to focusing on intervention and prevention, which in the end will lighten the load for our police department, who's really on the reaction side, and the courts that are really on the reaction side and trying to really reduce the amount of folks that are in the pipeline in the first place. We have to make a big investment, and I think there's a really great opportunity here with these resources coming into cities and just the timing around it. So I appreciate pointing out the GVI and some of the presentations that we've had in the past. Before I let you go, Ms. Schumacher, I just want to ask a question. That another initiative that I know you led on that was brought before the council was the Joint Powers Agreement effort between the schools, the county, and the police department, an effort, I believe. Can you do like a quick reminder of what that initiative was, and then where it is today? I think that there was a lot of interest around a model that used data that was in silos. If somebody was missing school a lot, and maybe had been picked up by the police a few times, that we could identify that there was a problem in the family or, in housing or whatever, and to try to send some social service partners in. But then there was concern about the sharing of information and potential targeting, racial targeting, and I'm just not sure where that conversation left off. If you could bring us up to speed.
Yeah, sure. So I think you kind of encapsulated it pretty well. I mean, it was a joint effort of the city and the county and the school district to think about, we have a lot of information in silos, and if that information could help us understand better which kids and families we need to be investing in and prioritizing, because we know we don't have enough resources, and we've often been told that we're resource rich and access poor. We don't have a good way to connect the folks in our community to the resources that they need. And so just in short, we had gotten a grant opportunity where the National Council on Crime and Delinquency, which exists to prevent kids from justice involvement, was interested in trying to pull together data on education, law enforcement, and what was the third one? Education, law enforcement, and I think city data. You guys have a limited amount of individual data on kids. But the idea was to kind of do an assessment and think about, are there factors that the kids that end up getting caught up in the justice system and potentially having deep involvement in the justice system may have in common, like when they're 8 years old, for instance, right? And if we were able to build a database, do an analysis, and they said, when a kid demonstrates this factor at age 8, you need to be concerned about investing in that child and helping to get them some supportive and protective resources and support. And so we had gotten that opportunity. The Joint Powers Agreement is the only legal way we have in the state of Minnesota to be able to share information like that, is through the context of that of Joint Powers Board, essentially. And part of the challenge with that is it comes with some limitations about community involvement. The only people on the actual board had to have been elected or appointed officials. It couldn't be just community members. And that was one of the challenges, because the community really wanted seats on that board and really wanted to be able to trust what was going on. The other concern was, like I said earlier, a lot of the data that we have in our justice systems is data on young people of color. And so what our goal was to try to do that data analysis, see if it revealed any information, and then if it could have helped us, that we would then use that information to have trusted community people reach out, knock on doors, and see if there are ways that we could connect families to resources and support. But it was just really clear that there were elements, there was just a lot of distrust about how that information could potentially be accessed and used. Could it ever be compromised? And it could potentially be sensitive information, and just wanting to make sure that it didn't get into the wrong hands, and that we also weren't just using data to identify kids, because we want to be trusting what people in the community are saying and what families in the community are asking for. Just part of the challenge is often the least connected families are the ones that need the most help and support, and don't even know where to go, don't have people to connect to, don't have enough connections in the community. So we're trying to learn the lessons learned from that opportunity and take that forward in terms of more intentionally working with people in our community as we try to transform our systems, having folks at the table working alongside us. And then also just thinking about other ways to build support around people in our community.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I remember thinking that was very promising, but also recognizing the challenges around it. And I know, just by comparison, that the work on the blueprint for safety with domestic violence has been very successful in using data to identify, what are patterns and when do we need to take our intervention to the next level. And so thank you for that update on that. All right, well, thank you all for those introductions. And of course, when we ask for introductions, we ask for a lot of information too. So you sort of front loaded us with, the work that you are committed to, the challenges that you're facing. We appreciate that a lot. I'm looking to my colleagues to see if there are any questions right out of the chutes here. And we're already at 11 o'clock, and I feel like I've already been very enlightened and actually heartened by the work. So I see Ms. Naker has a hand up.
Thanks, Council President. Thank you all so much for being here. I agree. I'm already feeling so much more informed about this really pressing problem, or problems, really. I guess I'm really interested in hearing the ideas that some of you mentioned that you want to share about what we can be doing differently. So I'd love to hear that. I think that's one of our official questions. I'm also wondering, and several of you mentioned this, it seems like each of you sort of interact with people at different stages of crisis episodically. So, you know, community ambassadors, Joel, you said you'll sort of see young people at a certain moment, but then not after that, and you don't have any sort of ability to have sustained contact. Similarly, obviously, St. Paul Police and the County Attorney's Office only interact at certain stages. So I guess I'm wondering, are there ways to wrap our arms around our young people in particular? Are there models of that kind of ongoing contact where we're not just each interacting with a young person at one moment of crisis and not being able to really envelop that young person and help them connect to the services they need on an ongoing basis?
If I can jump in.
Right on.
From the Healing Street standpoint, so I failed to mention one of the challenges that showed up with the pandemic is that we were already on course to begin our school-based violence prevention intervention work in partnership with High School for Recording Arts. And of course, with the pandemic, schools went to distant learning. But a part of our work is that continued wraparound work and services. So where I value and appreciate Joel stating like, hey, we want to have continued ongoing relationships with the youth and young adults that we're encountering. The intentionality with Healing Streets is to work in partnership, right? To create that ecosystem of wraparound services, so it doesn't just necessarily rest on one organization or one collective or one group of folks that are doing this work, that our community members and residents who have been impacted by group or gun violence begin to see this collective effort that we're doing. And so with, for example, we've been getting great referrals from SPPD. And when I say we, our grief portion of the work has responded to calls, and I'll be specific in one. The recent unfortunate triple homicide involving a mother and children, our grief workers were able to get the information from law enforcement, make contact with the family, then engage the family in immediate direct support right then and there. And as I think many of us on this call know, that in the immediate hours of grief, right, folks are all over the place. And to find a landing strip that says, hey, I want to be present here with these persons to unpack this may not be the most ideal, but nonetheless, we're there. And we then continue to keep that engaged contact going with our twice-a-week grief groups that are offered offsite, as well as our one-to-one custom groups where we can go into the homes. And so a part of that work is to stay at the table with this. And we have been working with, I want to say the numbers are from our grief circle work, we've been working with 255 families in particular since October of last year, and continue relationship ongoing twice-a-week grief work. So that has been one of the things that's been helpful to stay in right relationship with community around there. And outside of the incidents where I appreciate what Erica stated about reacting to this and some of the downstream pieces, to get upstream with it, our grief workers have been hosting community events in spaces and or in communities where violence has happened post or in the wake of violence. And so, for example, our grief workers held a community event that was, let me just pull it up real quick. There was a community outreach event that happened 12/3 of last year, where we were present, giving out coats, hats, gloves, and connecting people, to community resources, and that was off of Rice in Winnipeg. There was another North End community holiday event that happened 2 days before Christmas, where prayer, grief counseling, and relaxation therapy was happening. There was a distribution of supplies and stuff and toys that assistance. So these are the kind of things that we have been engaging in to stay in relationship with folks beyond that. And then lastly, we were able to do some work on the west side off of Cesar Chavez, 88 Cesar Chavez. We know that there was an incident of violence in an apartment building where there was a woman who lost her life in the parking lot. So we've been going to these spaces, doing this work, and staying in relationship even outside of the moments of violence.
Thank you.
Councilman, I'd like to address that if I could. in preparation for this discussion, I mean, I talked to our ambassador leadership, some of the line ambassadors, as well as some of the young people that we work with. And actually, I prepared answers to all the questions that you sent. But on this one, I was asking everyone, what could the city do? And a lot, especially the older individuals that I talked to, they remember a time when there was more activities for teens. When the Inner City Youth League was there, I know one elder said that he learned how to box in the basement of the Inner City Youth League. That's what helped keep him off the streets. I think Hallie Q. Brown used to have a skating rink and basketball court. So in talking to some young people, they feel that there's not activities for them. The kids we work with, like I said, they're high risk, survival-based youth. They're the ones that get kicked out of the rec centers, so the rec centers might not be the best place for them. If they're a group of African-American kids hanging out at McDonald's or Burger King, they get kicked out. I mean, unlike the young teenage white kids in Highland, they can hang out in somebody's basement. A lot of these individuals, they don't have a place to hang out. And you're the council person for downtown, so Fifth and Minnesota has about 100 kids every day, either on the street of Fifth and Minnesota or in the Skyway. So I think I talked to your office a while back. I would love to have a place where the kids could hang out instead of Fifth and Minnesota, but a place downtown where they could hang. It would have to definitely be run by experienced youth workers that can control and relate to the young people. The ambassadors, people like the ambassadors. That's one of the struggles we have when we try to refer to a different organization, is that we may refer a young person to another organization, but it doesn't stick for whatever reason. The organization may not look like the kids, or they don't know how to relate to the kids. They may be afraid of the kids, so it doesn't stick. So I really want to take the ambassadors to the next level where we can maintain that contact, and not just downtown, throughout the whole city.
Thank you. I just would like to acknowledge I have Mr. Tao, then Ms. Prince, then Ms. Yang with their hands up, and I'm only able to have 9 faces on the screen at the same time, so I'm gonna just trust the panelists to jump in if they feel like this is their question, and we'll kind of sort it out on the back end. But Mr. Tao.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you to our panelists for joining us today, and thank you for your work. I was just curious, Deputy Chief Banner, can you verify if there was 2 gun violence incidents where the perpetrator was supposed to have ankle bracelets or had ankle bracelets when those crimes were committed? Can you verify that was true or not?
Yeah, that's the information I received from a homicide senior commander, and I believe it was 3 of them, not 2, but there's actually 3.
Okay, yes. Thank you for clarifying. So my question to the panelists is that what happens to the young folks who are supposed to have ankle bracelet? Like, what is being done with them and their family so that are they being monitored, or do we have probation officer working with them and their family, or how are they just being let go into the community and doing what they want? If someone can clarify that, and then I have a follow-up question to that.
I think that question, I don't know if, is that a question that Ms. Schumacher, you can try to answer?
Yeah, so I can, that would be corrections that oversees folks that are placed, but when they're released on EHM, electronic home monitoring, they are on probation. So they would be released with some conditions of release and supervised by probation.
And it's my understanding, if I can jump in, Dr., I appreciate it, that with the home monitoring, no 2 residents that are on home monitoring are on the same exact plan. The conditions of release vary from person to person. Some folks are releasing have strict conditions that say you can't have any out of home time, that you have to be at your house 24 hours a day. You have to be, answer the calls when probation calls. You have to be present when probation check-ins happen. And then there are those residents that are on home monitoring that then some of them have, pastime where they can go and look for jobs, where they can go and take care of some of their basic needs and or make appointments. And so I don't know exactly what happened in the incident with these three folks, but just in my understanding of it, that those conditions vary. And just because somebody has a home monitoring bracelet doesn't mean that they're at home 24 hours a day. And if that adds some value or helps.
And maybe if I can just jump in here, because passing laws that protect people or prevent people who shouldn't have guns from getting guns is one of the primary missions for Moms Demand Action. And you're seeing the impact, right, of some sort of lax gun laws, whether it's our background check process or not having something like the extreme risk protection order that allows for guns to be removed from homes. And that's another area where I think the city can make a firm advocacy statement to say that gun laws need to change, either at the state level or the federal level, to protect people within our cities and make it harder to get your hands on, for dangerous people, that is, to get their hands on guns.
Councilman Tao, I'd just like to say I know for a fact that at least downtown in the past, Ramsey County Corrections would come down and do checks to see if any of their people were hanging out downtown. I think they faced some budget cuts as well, so I haven't heard that recently that they come down there, especially their intensive supervision. But I know in the past they would at least come and check. I mean, I wouldn't say it's just individuals on home confinement, just any individuals on probation. They will come down just to check on them.
Thank you. I want to thank the panelists for their answer and their, the reasoning why, and how the program worked and whatnot. But I think from where I stand is that if you have an ankle bracelet on and you're still out there shooting somebody, the system is not working. Somewhere in there we fail. Either we fail society, we fail that family, or somebody dropped the ball, because that shouldn't be happening. That's which leads to my other question, is that people don't just pick up the weapon and just go out and hurt somebody, right? Like, there's got to be some sort of progression of, how did it lead them to the point where they have to pick up a weapon to hurt another human being. And so does our kids in the community, do they start out with, whether it's truancy or I don't know, right? Like, and then they went to shoplifting, they went to carjacking, and then it goes into shooting somebody. Like, what are those, and what do we need to do to disrupt this progression so that we don't get to the point where we're just reacting to the violence in our community?
Thank you, Dr. With respect to the question that you asked, I just want to add some clarity from the data. And this comes from working with SPPD and other law enforcement agencies, that the data suggests that the average age of a shooter is in between the ages of 26 and about 29. The average age of a gun violence victim is in between the ages of around 25 and 31. And it's not to negate and say that youth or young persons or persons who identify as youth are not being charged or having challenges with group or gun violence. I just, for the sake of our youth residents in our community, I'm always advocating in these spaces for, our tables not to put all the onus and indictment on youth, because I think that just becomes like this natural proclivity. And it's real. It's understandable. I want to lean into that and acknowledge that in this space, and in respects to folks that are on, the violence and the progression of violence of how it's happening. With respect to the disparities, the inequities that exist, folks in survival mode, by no means does this excuse or give a reason for it, but we do have to speak to the notion of how these disparities and how these inequities create environments where we see violence rise up. And in response to how violence shows up in our community, I want to invite us into a space of thinking about the ways in which there's gaps For example, I know that during the pandemic, the Adult Detention Center had reduced their residents that were placed in the detention center by, I think, like some 40% or something like that. A number of them residents were placed on home confinement, and with how that plays out, I mean, these conditions show up in a myriad of ways, and so beginning to lean into this piece around, I think we miss it, around mental health and how our judicial system has housed and or detained and in some respects convicted persons who have extreme mental health challenges and have criminalized the behavior and done that. And I think about the gap that happens with our integrated mental health and justice system, of how we can pick up on some of the episodic behavior that's happening to potentially reduce some of these incidents. In no ways am I suggesting that this is the reason that contributes to gun violence. I just want to put some of these pieces out on the table for us to chew on.
Pastor Given, I appreciate that. I guess I just want to clarify. You said that the average age of a shooter is 26, you said?
From the data, and this was the data that came out of like 2019, 2020.
And is that the data in St. Paul, or?
Yes, that was some of the data that was in St. Paul.
Okay, and so I guess, do you know the three shooters that had ankle bracelet, are they in their 20s? I'm not clear on that.
I'm personally not familiar with that. That's the first I've heard of it. I was only answering from a perspective of knowing a little bit about home confinement and the data that exists around shots fired and persons being injured by gun violence.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
And Mr. Tom, maybe individually we can, like Holly or someone can follow up and connect the dots on those cases that we heard about and what the demographics were on those. I appreciate the questions on them, but we will follow up on that. All right, I see Ms. Prince and then Ms. Yang.
Thank you, Council President. And thanks to all the panelists. This has been incredibly informative, and we obviously have a lot of work to do. And there's one thing that we all know is that there are really a lot of problems that create gun violence among young people. And one of them, I spoke with Ms. Schumacher the other day, and we talked about that as a result of COVID, the St. Paul Public Schools have lost track of 5,000 students. So there is a huge problem that probably ultimately is contributing to kids making bad connections and making bad decisions. And obviously one of those bad decisions that has created a lot of public attention is really young people, not even driving age, carjacking. And I think we have to look at that problem because, and I understand that it's something that's happening around the country, but in St. Paul, again, as Ms. Schumacher said, we have an ability in St. Paul to come together as a community and to figure out how we're going to solve these problems. And that's what today is all about. When Deputy Chief Thomaser was before us a few weeks ago, he said that when the police, and Deputy Benner, if you, I'm not sure if you have this information as well, but he said that when a carjacking occurs, the police look at who was released within the last week from a carjacking arrest. And that is where they first look for the young people that may be involved in the latest carjacking. So we have an issue with whether it's because of COVID that we're not able to detain youth. I'm on the JDI stakeholder group, and I know that as a county and as a city, we have been really proud of our efforts to move away from detention. But what I so deeply worry about is that when those young people are released back out into the community, they are not only a danger to others, but they're putting themselves at a much higher risk of having their lives end by gun violence. So I'm just wondering, on that particular issue of this kind of revolving door of youth who are arrested and charged getting back into the community so that they can do these things again, do we have any ideas about how we can address that revolving door problem?
Councilmember Prince, I can answer the question. Your earlier question is related to the carjacking from AC Thomaser. Yes, the answer, he's correct on that. When there is a carjacking, we do look at who's actually out and about. Yes, we're missing 5,000 kids, or misplaced 5,000 kids in the school system. Well, it's almost like all the crime that we have. It's always a small portion of society that's actually creating these crimes, and that goes along with these carjackings. Since the beginning of the year, we've had 29. Early February or late February, we made an arrest on a certain handful of youth. There's a couple of them, and since that arrest date, February 26th, knock on wood, it's now March 17th, and we've yet to have another one, which would tell you that the more and more the investigators are investigating these cases, it's not only the ones that they were arrested on, they're tying them to multiple other arrests, because now we have something more that the victims can go back and look at, and sure enough, it is the same group. And then that goes the same with the gun violence, the same with the shooters that are around here. It's not a large amount of people doing it. It's a small group, which goes back to the gun violence of the GVI model. It's not it's identifying those individuals that are going to most likely be responsible for the gunfire or become a victim. And because we can see that because of the contacts that we're having and the behavior that we're seeing. But you're right. What is the message? How do we get in front of it? How do we, what do we do to keep these individuals in custody? We just had one of our latest homicides over in the Hudson Road. I mean, that mother has lost. I mean, that's two of her children recently, and she has a third one that's out there that has had multiple contacts with us. So these are the things that we're concerned about, and it's that message, and that's why it's great to have these programs, with Danny's group out there, with Joel's group, with the ambassadors, because it's when I first started this job, that was the police officer's job. It was the beat officer's job that was out there. We had these contacts with the community. We had that time to walk the block and to become part of the community, and to know the parents and to have these one-on-one conversations with them. But now as the years go on, we're looking at different other groups and other people to take that place, to be that community contact. So it's out there, it's there. There's a big beacon that points to that. There are certain individuals that are in trouble, but it takes the community to get together, to come up with a plan, to be advocates, to have that loud voice, to say we're tired of it and we care about you and we're not going to let it happen to you. So,
Councilman Prince, is Joel Franklin. Can I address this a little bit? Again, when I talked to my staff about one of your questions was why they're increasing gun violence, but I also did talk to them about the carjacking. So these are a couple of answers I got about the carjacking. One, they said the pandemic, they do believe, does have a factor in that. They said because people are at home now, so there's less burglaries because people are home, and so a lot of these young people are doing carjackings instead. And then another thing that really surprised me, because I'm not a gamer, I don't play video games, but they were saying a lot of these young people are really influenced by video games, like Grand Theft Auto. I guess in that video, I never played it in my life. In that game, they do have carjackings in that game. They have rapes and killings in that game. And we have kids who do suffer from mental health, and they're vulnerable. So they're vulnerable. I mean, these are not excuses, but these are reasons that they may be doing the kind of behavior that they're doing. I have a whole long list of other reasons why they talked about the the gun violence. I don't know if you want me to go through that now, but I can go through that later if you like.
Real quick, Joel, just from the investigative side, when we're actually talking to the individuals that have conducted the carjackings, and it's not about money and it's not about selling the car, it's all about the thrill. So they're doing it because it's the excitement from it, and that's what we're getting from the individuals that are actually doing it.
And then what my people were saying that, I mean, a lot of them, they don't think it's wrong. Between the video games and even some of the music, the rap music, there's a genre of music called drill rap, which it really glorifies shootings and robbings and rapes and all of this. So they listen to the music, they listen to the video games, and it desensitized them to this kind of behavior.
Yeah.
If I could just ask a quick follow-up question, because this is really helpful. I'm wondering if GVI handles this kind of thing, and I hear you, Pastor Givens, talking about, how we are able to make those personal contacts. Are the police able to share the names of these kids that are back out on the street so that you are able to make those connections? It's really good news from Deputy Chief Benner about the fact that the numbers are relatively small, and that's of course what we've heard from GVI. So I wonder if they have arrest records, then we probably have a number of them that we're available to identify and work with.
Yeah, that's a great, and to just for the sake of this conversation, nationally, crime is up around, some of these same patterns and ways of being. So we're not unique, and I don't share that to give us any reprieve. I just want to name that this is a part of what's happening nationally. I'm on calls, Mark and I are on calls, monthly calls with there's at least 40 cities that have offices of violence and prevention or offices of neighborhood safety that we work with monthly, that we're on calls, just kind of talking about the trends of what's happening in that. And so the names, as far as the carjackings and that kind of stuff, from the Healy Street standpoint, our focus is primarily on group and gun violence, and there are occasions where we show up and assist in other areas. And so from a group and gun violence standpoint, we are working with SPPD, and with getting that list of names of, as Deputy Chief Benner had talked about, there's a very small percentage of residents within our community that are responsible for 60+% of the violence that's happening. And so with that, as we now are bringing on our community mediators, what will happen is that we'll work with law enforcement as well as community ambassadors and other partners that have information, because I don't think it's just solely upon law enforcement. I think that community agencies and or orgs and community persons in and of themselves have a great deal of narrative and information that oftentimes doesn't get reported. Or doesn't make its way to law enforcement, right, to be investigated. And so we'll be leaning into those spaces to then go through the list of names, see who within, the folks that we've hired are people that are known. And if we have warm contacts, we're going to go and make those connections to, similar to how GVI is what they call a custom, where they basically customize a response and they go to the individual's last residence, known, on file, and have a brief conversation that says, hey, we realize that, you recently were either impacted by gun violence or a perpetrator of gun violence. We have a concern that you could potentially be impacted or perpetrated again. Our goal is for you to be safe, free, and alive. We want to engage you in the program. So that will be the ways in which we'll lean into this in the coming months, and you'll see more of that. That's a concerted effort, again, between both Ramsey County and Hennepin County law enforcement. And then just as a quick teaser, the goal from the Healy Street standpoint is to develop a comprehensive 7-metro county-wide response to group and gun violence. As many of us know on this call, violence is mobile. And I believe that DC Benner, as well as Joe Franklin and Eric and Merrick can attest to this, that an incident happens in Minneapolis, and here's an example. Lamplighter, the young woman who was killed at the Lamplighter. This was an incident that involved some residents from Hennepin County that traveled over. This incident happened, and so when we start talking about investigation, if there wasn't that communication across counties and across lines, we wouldn't have been able to arrive at that. And so being able to lean more into that work is one of our strategies from a Healing Streets standpoint to address and begin to engage this.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn over to Councilmember Yang for a question, and then I hate to do this, but I think after that I'll shift it to Ms. Naker to close up today. As I promised from the get-go, this is not a one and done conversation. We may have this exact same group back again to continue the conversation. We may reach out to you individually, but I just wanted to, I hate when we come to the end of our time and we are not done talking. But I'm going to turn over to Ms. Yang, give some space for those questions that, their questions that she has and the answers, and then Ms. Naker will bring us home today. Ms. Yang.
Thanks, Council President. I have a speaking engagement at 11:30, so I do have to hop off in a few minutes, but I want to say thanks to the panelists for being here. Thanks to the staff for organizing this. This is a really personal topic to me. When I was 13, my brother, who was just a year older than me, he was a survivor of gun violence, and I will never forget the moment my family, we got a phone call from the hospital saying that we needed to rush to the emergency room. And then just this morning, I woke up to one of my fellow Hmong sisters reaching out to me, checking in with all her Asian American friends because of the shooting spree that happened in Atlanta. And we saw, and read in the article about apparently Asian American women who were killed, in that event. And it was so devastating. And I'm holding space for that today. And also recognizing and wanting to name that preventing gun violence and dismantling this work, it can't be done, in just like a vacuum. Like, it's about dismantling racism. It's about dismantling patriarchy and white supremacy. And these systems thrive, and they are not accidental at all. I think it's very, very intentional. And for us to do this work, it means that we have to be committed to all of that work and doing it as a collective and a community. And so my question to all of you is, I'm really curious, what do you think here in St. Paul we are doing well in, and what do we need to work on and improve in as well, so that we could actually achieve, our goal of preventing gun violence?
Thank you, Ms. Yang. I'll jump in and just state that I think that the work that has begun from whether going all the way back to Community Ambassadors inception up to the work that is happening now is what we have done well, and continue to stay at the table and develop a response with this. I just want to invite us into a space from looking at the national data and the ways in which other cities comparable to our size have begun to address some of these same issues. The data suggests that, in creating initiatives like the ones that we have now, it's going to take anywhere from 18 to 24 months post the initiative getting started to begin to see some of the results and potential declines. And so you use like an advanced peace model out of Richmond, which started in 2007. They didn't see the tremendous decline or reduction, I should say, in group gun violence until almost 3 years later. Then it spiked up a little bit for a little bit, and then it went back down. And it has now maintained that kind of consistency on through. And so I invite us into a space of having faith in the process of the work. And I know that that's difficult with incidents of violence continuing to happen, but trusting that the ecosystem that we've created and engaged is working and is responding, and it's just going to take some more time and as well as investment in it. I'm committed to stand at the table with this as well. So I thank you all so much.
Yeah, Councilman Yang, this is Joel Franklin from the Ambassadors. I really just want to jump in because I had some good information on why the staff and the young people we work with thought there was gun violence. So social media actually was the number one thing that everyone said. It keeps disputes going on. Back in the day, if you were involved in a fight, there may be 10 people standing around instigating to encourage you fighting. On social media, you got 100 people, and it doesn't go away. The other part of that is instead of young people fist fighting nowadays, they shoot. So the disputes are handled by violence, is shooting. So it's not fist fights anymore. A lot of things on social media that causes the deadly shootings had to do with on social media, their friends who were killed are disrespected on social media. And so that keeps things going. Talking to some of the young people, they feel like they need to carry a gun just for safety. And I think we talked earlier about there's a lot of guns on the streets. I know the ambassadors have seen, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, with guns. there's just too many guns on the streets. Mental health is a huge issue, substance abuse, and I just mentioned the video games is playing an impact, the music, jealousy, which I think plays in with poverty. You know, they see individuals with things that they want, so they take it or they kill for it. Lack of respect for self and others, not respecting authority. And then there's a breakdown in the family. Like I said, there's a small percentage that are involved in this kind of behavior, but they're saying that, you know, some parents, they're allowing the young people to use drugs in the home. They're playing the video games with them. And some of these parents, they need help themselves. They need, you know, you don't know how to be a parent when you have kids, you know, unless you've seen it or read a book. You're not born knowing how to be a parent. So some of the parents need help and mentors. And some of the parents may have been abused, you know, as young people, and they never dealt with that. So those are some of the reasons why they thought there was gun violence going on in the community. To answer your question more specifically about what's working, I mean, I do appreciate the city of St. Paul, you know, taking a holistic approach to addressing the problem. I mean, I appreciate the support that the ambassadors have had since we started and the increased support we had under Mayor Carter and the city council. I was on the town hall last night for Community First Public Safety Commission, and just the input from the community. You know, that I think that's huge, and the fact that you guys are taking this seriously. Changes. I mean, I do strongly feel, and I'm former president of the state NAACP and former vice president of the St. Paul NAACP. Minnesota has some of the worst racial disparities in the country, and so does the Twin Cities. The National NAACP did a report about a year ago that talks about the disparities and how that plays with the crime and violence in cities. It's a good report. I can forward it to everyone if they'd like to see it. But yeah, we need to start addressing some of the disparities, the poverty, the income disparities, education. I mean, I can go on. Another thing that came up in the meeting yesterday was quite interesting is that, I mean, I'm not a big supporter of defunding the police, but I do agree that the police there should be some type of reform. A young lady yesterday at the town hall indicated that she would like to see more community policing, where the police officers actually come from the community and they understand the community and people of color. I actually been on the police oral panel 4 years in a row, and be honest with you, the candidates, the applicants, you know, most of them did not come from St. Paul. Most of them came from the suburbs. Most of them came from rural areas, and they weren't people of color. And I'll be honest with you, you know, we had a question, what's your involvement with people of color? And a lot of them never had any experience working with people of color. One gentleman said his experience working with people of color, he went to the Hmong Farmers Market, which was crazy. So I think it would be good to have community policing where the police are actually in the community, they come from the community, and they engage and they know the community. I mean, I think that would go a long way. I guess the last thing I'll say, I don't know what the city can do, but I really think somebody needs to lobby the social media and the video games and the music. I mean, I know for the social media, they were talking about the disinformation in the political realm, but that violence has really been perpetrated through social media. Anytime there's an incident of violence, it's on social media. I mean, I know the police use that probably to solve a lot of cases, but they're shooting and they're promoting it on social media, and it's keeping the violence going. So I think social media is like one of the worst perpetrators of what's going on in the community regarding violence right now.
If I have a couple minutes here to jump in, just answer these questions as well. As what the St. Paul Police Department has done well, or what we've been doing well, is I would have to say bolstering our ranks of our gang and gun unit, adding individuals to that unit to make sure that we had 7 days a week coverage for individuals to respond to shots fired type calls, investigator type stuff, instead of just having out patrol. We've also added investigators to our homicide robbery unit, which in the turnaround, we actually ended up with a 90% clearance, over 90% clearance rate on our homicide investigations last year. We've also partnered with our local, state, and federal agencies, working a lot with Ramsey County, the BCA, ATF, the U.S. Attorney's Office, through the Crime Guns Intelligence Type Center through ATF, where we're using more evidence-based policing strategies as it relates to shots fired and collecting shell casings. And that's been a quick turnaround where it helps us link more and more shootings together, where it's not just a one-off. We can actually say this firearm was actually used not only in this event, but we can link them to several other ones. So that's working well. Then also it's a coordinated effort, not only with our department, with all our federal and our other local partners, and it goes back to this Operation Intercept as it relates to carjackings, because it's not only in Minneapolis and St. Paul, but the youth that we're arresting, because once again, we talk about that river, that same thing, they're going across the river, and it's the same youth on that side of the river that we're doing it over here. So it's been, that's been working on our side. Things that the city can do or things that we can work on, it's part of that prevention, intervention, and the enforcement piece. It's also the piece where we need to get the community involved, and we need to get advocates out there, a stronger voice to let people know that enough is enough. We have to get the community engaged, and we have to be strategic about it. And the other part is we have to, in my opinion, we have to advocate for consequences for some of these individuals that are the repeat offenders. We really have to show there's some kind of consequences for your action, because when we don't, we just end up with more and more victims. And but that's, in my opinion, what we need to work on as well.
Maybe I'll just chime in, knowing that we're over time, but I agree with all of the great stuff that's happening. I agree that outreach is necessary because we want that next St. Paul resident to feel like there's good stuff happening to keep them safe and not choose to go out and buy a gun to keep them safe. And I want to be able to give organizations like the Ambassadors and Healing Streets the time and the community patience to do the good work that they're doing. And I think that will require some really high-touch outreach to make sure that in our West 7th neighborhood, we know what's happening so that we don't have to feel unsafe, but that we can also plug in and we can help the work that's happening elsewhere. We're covered. We can be part of community improvement.
Well, I feel like my head is swimming with ideas, with questions, with the complexity of the problem. And I know this is always how we end these conversations, but we do need to leave it here. I want to thank all of our panelists so much for your time, for all that you do every day, and for, frankly, the thoughtfulness and the intentionality that you put in preparing for today's conversation. Joel, I could tell that you and lots of others have probably notes and information that we didn't get a chance to talk about today, and would really encourage you to share that with us. Because this is not the last time that we're going to be talking about this, as Council President Brenmoen mentioned. I also really want to thank Councilmember Yang for bringing us home to the personal nature of this topic. We've discussed this very objectively today, but I want to acknowledge the pain and the loss that is behind every single one of the stories we've discussed today, and many that we haven't. And I think it's that pain and loss that we are hearing from our community members, and that is driving us to have this conversation and many others like it. I think that my colleagues and I are completely committed to the long-term work to eliminate the disparities that were mentioned today that are the ultimate drivers of this issue, the lack of access to jobs and housing and transit and childcare and all of the other issues that have been discussed that lead to hopelessness and then lead to violence. And we also know that short-term punitive solutions do not work. I think what we are interested in and what we've been working towards and what this conversation was part of is an attempt to figure out what are those short-term restorative solutions that we can invest in, that we can resource appropriately, or that we can, I thought to Erica's great point, connect appropriately where we actually already have the resources. We know our community is demanding a plan and an acknowledgement that we are taking this problem seriously, and I really hope that those watching today or who watch afterwards will see the complexity of the problem illustrated in today's conversation, but also our commitment to addressing it. We are not shying away from the problem because it is complicated. I think the good news is we have everything we need to solve this. We have the money, we have the models, and most importantly, we have the leaders like you on our panel today to figure this out, and we're committed to doing it. So this was just one conversation. We knew we wouldn't solve the problem today, but I think this was extremely valuable in helping put one more of those pieces into the plan that we are building and that we will be communicating out. So thank you again to everyone for being here today. We look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.